2 or 3 years' time, and she's done that. She's achieved that. But in terms of positioning for 2016, there's a huge amount of work still to be done in that respect.
I read a really interesting piece in the New Yorker a couple of weeks ago, and there's half a blog post drafted around it that said more or less that the Republicans, there's something about it. It takes three big losses before you actually get it and transform yourself. And I think that applies to Scottish Labour to some extent, because it's like 2011 never happened. And they seem to think that the Scottish people trust what they have to say on any matter, and they don't. And every time they do something like Garl or some of the other small beer smear and run tactics, is that people are just reminded why they didn't vote for them in 2011 and why they won't be rushing back anytime soon. And it's incredibly short-sighted, actually. And I also think there's just something about them. They actually think Scotland's going to vote no next year, and the SNP is going to go into meltdown and kind of a period of civil war in order to replace Salmond, and all they have to do is sit back and wait. And I can't, they're so wrong on so many levels with that approach. There's just no hope for them until they get it themselves.
I love the way Jamie put it very euphemistically, a glaring deficit of talent. That sort of made me laugh, which is a very, very nice way to say that they're a bunch of, okay.
I'm going to stick to glaring deficit of talent, Mike.
I know, but I love that, the way it was put so delicately. I suppose another thing we could move on to this week is the Scottish budget, and I believe, Kate, you've been having a look at this. What popped out?
Just picking up on some of the headline measures, and I'll kind of cede to Andrew on the bedroom tax. That just make a couple of quick points. Really, is I think that the first thing to say is that there's nobody to touch John Swinney when it comes to this brief. He's made it his own. I did a blog post, I think it was last year, on Big Bad John and how he strides into that chamber and he sees them all down. And I mean, if you go back and read the transcripts of the budget debate, they try to pin him down in some of the detail, and he just swats them aside. I mean, it's always a majestic performance and a very different style from both Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon. But there's nobody gets near him in this. And I also think he's not had enough credit almost in terms of what he's managed to do, which has more or less been pulling rabbits out of hats. And, with a reduced budget from a reduced block grant from London, plus the difficult circumstances we find him in, he's managing it more or less pretty well and trying to keep the wool from the door and the worst of cuts. Now, that can only take us so far, and I think everybody's agreed we are at the end of that rope without a kind of growing economy to help out. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years. But the other thing he did was a kind of man for all seasons type of budget, which was he found money to mitigate against the impact of welfare reform, an additional 30 million to go in to help those affected by bedroom tax. But he also managed to maintain all the freebies that go down so well with those who are better off. And he also kind of found money to try and invest in infrastructure and in other measures. And I think the one thing as well, it's really interesting that I was at a welfare reform committee question where the deputy convener Jamie Hepburn asked a question about do you actually think it's right that MSP should have to bail out Westminster by basically kind of using our resources here in Scotland to get us out of the mess that Westminster's putting us into, which was basically saying, should we just leave welfare reform to have its worst effects, or should we actually divert Scottish resources into helping people? And everybody who was there giving evidence said absolutely yes to the latter and no to the former. And I think it's to the SNP's credit that while pointing up how nasty this Tory government is being, it actually is digging deep into its pockets to try and find ways to help the most vulnerable in our society and those who are worst off, who we could, to all intents and purposes, kind of turn a blind eye to, because at the end of the day, they don't vote so much, they don't, they're almost expendable, and they certainly are seen as expendable in the UK fight for marginals between Tory and Labour at every general election. But the SNP's not done that, and fair credit to them for that.
We've tried to keep the principle of universality that Labour have been speaking against recently. But Andrew, did you have any thoughts on the budget?
Yeah, well, just one thing I wanted to pick up on it, and I wanted to see what you all think about this, really, because you couldn't help but note that one of the prominent features, maybe the most prominent feature of the budget, discussion, debate, and conversations in the chamber about it, was about the so-called bedroom tax, the spare room subsidy, pick your euphemism, political choice, about it. To begin with, I mean, the bedroom tax, the spare room subsidy, whatever you want to call it, is a horrible policy, and a policy which I think we should definitely do away with, and I support measures to mitigate its impact insofar as possible, which Kate was speaking to there. But I do have a kind of strategic question about it, which I aired on Twitter, which caused quite a lot of controversial responses this week. And my question is essentially this: is the bedroom tax a sufficiently important vote-snaring issue to actually bear the weight which is being put on it by the SNP politically? And just to explain what I mean by that, you quite often hear the argument, vote yes and we'll get rid of the bedroom tax. If you vote no, you'll be stuck with it. My question, I suppose, is firstly, how many people does the bedroom tax actually affect? Well, you look at it affects people who are in social housing and those who are in the private rental sector who are on particular kinds of support. But actually, the number of people it directly affects, so the people who you can expect to be most concerned with it, and they are people we have to be very concerned about, terribly disaffected people, people who are living in poverty. That's very important, but they're not all that many people. So in order for the bedroom tax to be an important, effective political device for the SNP and for the Labour Party for that matter, we're going to have to get other people interested in this, going to have to make it kind of totemic to make everybody care about abolishing the bedroom tax. And I'm just not as convinced, I suppose, as many people are, that is the reality. Maybe we all ought to care an awful lot more, but I'm just not convinced that most Scots who aren't affected by this actually are likely to turn their votes yes from no or don't know to yes on the basis of this bedroom tax. And certainly talking to many of my kind of left-wing friends, you ask them, well, how many people actually live in social housing these days? And only a section of people who live in social housing will be affected. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't care about those people, but how many people can we assume are directly affected? The answer is often much lower than they expect. So I wonder if some of these misapprehensions about what the electorate looks like, who will be directly affected, potentially lead us a wee bit astray strategically. That would be the argument. I'm happy to convince that I'm totally wrong on it.
On the tactical side there, I think, I suppose the closest kind of comparative thing would be the poll tax. But what you're saying is true, because the poll tax was much easier to organise a movement around because it simply affected everybody, blanket. And you can create a real movement around such an unpopular policy. I broadly agree with what you say. The bedroom tax is horrible, it has to go. But I think there's a grave danger that trying to build a movement around such a thing is maybe not the best idea. Jamie, you got any thoughts on it?
I agree with the thrust of Andrew's comments, and with yours, Michael. I don't think that the bedroom tax can be turned into a second poll tax, and that's what the SNP is trying to do. The poll tax obviously occupies a very specific place in Scottish political memory. And it's difficult to imagine the bedroom tax, as unpleasant as it is, occupying a similar space in the run-up to 2014. Having said that, I was talking about the failure of the Labour Party to define itself in certain important respects. The SNP fails to define itself in certain important respects, and welfare is one of them. It talks at great length about mitigating the worst effects of the UK government's welfare reforms, and says very little about a coherent alternative, or what an independent Scottish welfare state would look like. And until it does that, I think it's going to struggle to get people to rally to the independence cause. Nicola Sturgeon was on Sky News this morning talking about the UK government's welfare reforms, and she's right to oppose them, and the SNP are right to try and do what they can to help people out who are affected by them, but they need a coherent, clear and attractive alternative. My worry is that they probably don't have time to develop one between now and the referendum. Deeper worry is that they aren't going to, and they're not all that interested in doing it. It's easy for them to be vague, and it's convenient, but it's strategically pretty unwise.
Kate?
I think the bedroom tax does play. I will disagree with you here, Andrew.
Please do. Please convince me.
I'm not sure I'll convince you, but I do think it plays, and I think your word totemic is absolutely right. What's going on with welfare reform is hugely complicated and can't really be boiled down. And actually, if you actually say to the larger population, and they're going to force single parents of children out the door to work when those children reach five, you may get the response back, people like myself who are single parents and who've always worked going, and what's the problem with that? So, some of the things actually don't play that well with voters, whereas the bedroom tax is absolutely punishing people for something they have no control over, which is the size of house that they have been allocated, and also worse than that, they have no way to go, so they are stuck with that and they're having to pay more for their housing. Who does it affect? 80,000 people directly affected. So if you then multiply that by, say, they've all got 3 family members or people that they know, or indeed are living with them in their household, you're actually up at nearer 250,000 people directly or indirectly affected living in a household who are going to be hit by the bedroom tax. And then there's everybody they know. And while social housing is less important in Scotland than it used to be, we still have more people living in council or public rented accommodation than we do south of the border. So, it is still a bigger issue for us up here. And I think it's the one bit of welfare reform that can be easily boiled down into, look at what those nasty Tories are doing, and this is what happens when you don't have control over all the powers and levers that a normal country has, and you aren't able to make choices for yourself. Because if we were independent, one, we wouldn't have those nasty Tories in government because we don't vote for them, and 2, we would make different choices. And I suppose what all they're trying to do is find one bit of the welfare reform agenda that talks to people's sense of injustice, and it is doing so. And secondly, find the bit that is easily explicable within that wider context of reasons to vote for independence. So that's how I see it, and I think it's the right one to pick. I think that, if you wanted to kind of, I think Jamie's right. There's a big problem in that they don't have a cohesive alternative to current welfare reforms. Have absolutely no store in what this expert group's going to come out with, given that its starting point initially was to look at what we would need to do to reverse the Tory cut. The starting point for the welfare state in independent Scotland is a blank sheet, not like just sticking plaster over cuts that have already happened. I do think that's a longer term problem and a longer term issue, but at the moment it's a really handy way to explain why we need to be voting yes. And I suppose we just need to keep on trying to make that stick.
The question surely is on political traction, and I don't get the sense that there's the same anger in Scotland at this current UK coalition government as there was in the late 1980s at the Thatcher government, and that makes it harder for both the SNP and the Labour Party to make political capital out of it.
Absolutely, Julie, but I think the wider issue is why is there no anger at all? I can't believe how unangry, to deploy yet another non-English expression, how unangry any of us are. And people say, well, it's because we're all coping. Everybody's too busy coping with the impact of financial recession, of cuts, of everything else. I don't buy that, and I don't get it either, why we're not angry the way we were about the poll tax and other things.
I mean, I think just coming in back on the point, the original point. I mean, I think actually you're right, Kate, in lots of ways. I mean, I can be convinced actually that it's a complex field of decisions that are being undertaken by the UK coalition. Some of which are probably quite popular. Let's be blunt about that, and other ones which are rather less so. But taken as a package, it's quite difficult to explain. And I can see that there's a value in the totem, and to an extent, the bedroom tax has become sufficiently totemic that the SNP and the Labour Party can't avoid talking about it now. I'm not arguing really that they shouldn't talk about it. I'm not saying that they shouldn't condemn it or say we do X, Y, and Z. I suppose what I was saying is that I don't know how much juice it has in it really, as opposed to saying that it doesn't have any juice as a political argument. And I will not so convinced that it can bear the pressure being put on it, as opposed to arguing that no pressure should be put on this particular quite promising political point in some respects. I think that's my kind of reasoned conclusion, I think, on this one.
And also, the SNP's campaign against Tory welfare reforms is compromised as ever by its triangle